Over this past week, we just got a bunch of news and updates around Starfield, such as one, we're going to be seeing more about the game, but also a look into some of the recent fan frustrations with Starfield and its marketing. The big batch of news recently was around Gamescom. This is the biggest gaming convention in the world, and it's going to be taking place from August 23rd to 27th, so just a couple of weeks away. Xbox and Bethesda are going to Gamescom in a pretty big way. It's described how they're going to have their biggest booth at the convention ever, as well as a 300-seat theater. And Starfield will be shown here. Xbox describes attendees will be able to check out exclusive theater presentations from Bethesda Game Studios' highly anticipated Starfield. And they go on to describe how also in the theater there's going to be presentations around Forza Motorsport as well as Ara History Untold. Although, at least based off what we know right now, it seems like that's really it for Starfield at Gamescom. Xbox has described how there will also be hands-on for other games like Stalker 2, Payday 3, and even Phantom Liberty, but Starfield is not going to be a playable title at Gamescom 2023. And that's despite the fact that this event is taking place just a week before Starfield Early Access is meant to begin, and that lack of playability has definitely led to at least some pushback and concern in some corners of the community. But this Gamescom Starfield presentation is honestly pretty interesting, and I think we have a pretty good idea of what we could expect from it. Bethesda did something very similar for Fallout 4 back in 2015, where at that Gamescom they had this behind closed door showing of Fallout 4 gameplay, except somebody at this gameplay showcase secretly filmed it and ended up leaking the gameplay online. I know though, I'm not a huge fan of somebody leaking this gameplay online. What we could see is actually pretty awesome, and if you're going to Gamescom this year, you may be in store for something cool, because if we look at the Fallout 4 gameplay, it largely looks to be unscripted. It's really just somebody playing some of the early parts of Fallout 4 in front of you. I've been to some events like this in the past, and a lot of times we'll do something really fun where the person that's playing the game will even ask the crowd what to do next. There's some crowd input on what decisions are made early on, or whether or not to take out somebody or go a peaceful route. So when it comes to Gamescom 2023, I would expect something very similar for Starfield. Likely different sessions of somebody playing some of the early quests in the game in a 300-person theater with a bunch of people watching. But then of course is the big question of, well, will you at home actually be able to see this? And honestly, at this point, it's not entirely clear, but there's definitely some hope. They did say, if you can't make it to Cologne this year, which is where Gamescom is taking place, don't worry, we'll bring the Xbox booth directly to you with deep dives, gameplay, and developer interviews live streamed across 3 days of the show. So at the very least, get subscribed. I will be going to Gamescom personally this year, and I will be trying to watch this Starfield presentation, and if permitted, I'll make a video on my thoughts on the gameplay. In addition, I also plan to play Stalker 2 and probably give my impressions of that as well. But I definitely do have some hope here. The way Gamescom is formatted, the first day is media only, but then each subsequent day is open to the public as long as you have tickets. It hasn't been specified whether or not this Starfield presentation is for media or fans, but I think it's likely going to be both. So I would expect a ton of impressions, perhaps even some videos from whatever is shown at this event. But even beyond that, there's a pretty good chance we're going to be getting some interviews. Starfield is really going to be the big thing. This is just going to be a couple of weeks before its official release date, so even if we can't play it at Gamescom, there'll likely be quite a few members from Bethesda and perhaps even Todd Howard giving interviews sharing new details. And I wouldn't be shocked if we get a launch trailer here as well. Opening Night Live kicks off Gamescom at the night of August 23rd. It's hosted by Jeff Keighley, and this seems like a perfect opportunity for a new Starfield trailer to drop. One of the discussions to spin out of this is that fan concern over Starfield not being playable. Because if this early access period is beginning just a week later, why can't we play the game at Gamescom? Surely it's ready at this point. And although I could definitely dive deeper into the arguments on either side, I think the simple reality is that's just not what Bethesda does. You could look back to years upon years of different events and conventions, and Bethesda almost never has a hands-on opportunity for their games, specifically Bethesda Game Studios. Fallout 4 never really had a hands-on. It had a similar behind closed doors showing, and although Fallout 76 did have a hands-on for one of its DLCs, that's obviously quite a bit different because it was a DLC and not the core game itself. If anything, Fallout 76 was largely the outlier. It got a preview event with a bunch of media getting hands-on, but Fallout 4 never got such an event, and that's really the other major data point, at least in recent history. So at least for me personally, Starfield not being hands-on at Gamescom isn't a red flag, it's just how Bethesda tends to do things. And at the very least, we are getting one Todd Howard interview probably pretty soon. Just recently, a New York Times reporter asked on Twitter for questions for Todd Howard. It turns out this is actually for an Esquire profile on Todd Howard's life overall, but it seems like this interview was already conducted and finished, so I wouldn't be shocked if we get it dropping in the next couple of days. But we also got some new game details just recently on Starfield. Jamie Mallory from the Starfield Direct Direct is a producer at Bethesda Game Studios and recently had a profile posted by the company. They describe how the level of team collaboration on Starfield is simply off the charts, particularly when it comes to the shipbuilder. We saw how Starfield is actually going to have a couple of different shipbuilders. One that's going to be more of a handhold where you're replacing parts and it's a bit simpler, but then also a more in-depth shipbuilder that allows you to truly break down your spaceship and get into every individual piece. But here we could also hear from Jamie Mallory how there's perhaps more coming in the future. We get this massive list of exciting features we're looking forward to discussing and potentially implementing in the future, but shh, I can't spill all the details here. This is pretty cool. It almost sounds like some of these systems of Starfield may see further expansion via some of the DLCs. I know I, for one, would definitely love a spaceship-themed DLC. It could add some cool things like new ship parts, but also a bunch of additional mechanics around spaceships that perhaps they didn't have enough time to finalize before release. All we've really heard about Starfield is how there is a mountain of content here, so you have to imagine there's a few things that were cut before release that will get expanded on in DLC. We also hear about how much of the current work on Starfield is being done around player optimizations. It seems like at this point most new features would be put on hold, and I wouldn't be shocked if there's even a decent sized team working on the Elder Scrolls 6 already, right as Starfield is wrapping up. But we also hear a bit about faction quest lines. It is described how Jamie Mallory has been really surprised by how varied different faction quest lines are, and some players may even miss some of this content if you just stick to the main and core story. But if you do go off the beaten path, you're in store for a reward. The amount of content packed into these faction storylines is truly astonishing. It's like embarking on a grand adventure within an adventure, where every choice you make and every interaction you have shapes the course of the tale. The character development, the plot twists, the moral dilemmas, I've been completely hooked. These quests offer a chance to delve deeper into the game's rich lore and uncover hidden gems that add layers of depth and excitement to the overall experience. And honestly, all of that sounds absolutely amazing to me. As of right now, this is one of the areas of Starfield we haven't seen all that much about. We get a brief overview and an introduction into some of the factions in Starfield, but story content hasn't really been marketed all that much. We don't know much of anything about what the main story will exactly entail, or even what kind of quests will be going on. And considering the game has over 250,000 lines of dialogue, there's certainly going to be a lot of questing and a lot of talking. Many of you probably know Jamie Mallory as she was prominently featured in the Starfield Direct for her animal-themed ships, as well as her sandwich-stealing antics. But also in this interview, it was confirmed that Jamie Mallory created a sandwich-themed spaceship known as the Griller. Starfield also just recently got the Xbox Play Anywhere label, which is pretty exciting. This basically means that if you do buy it on the Microsoft Store, you'll be able to play it on either PC or Xbox. That one purchase will carry over to both platforms, as well as your progress will be carried over with it. Your save data will be automatically transferred, so you can seamlessly transition from a console to your PC, as well as even some of the achievements have started to pop up for Starfield. This image has been floating around showing Starfield as having 50 achievements. I know though I wasn't able to fully verify this is legit. On one hand, it's probably a safe bet, but even further, this popped up shortly after achievement languages were added to Starfield on SteamDB, so there's a pretty good chance this is real. But overall, right now, we find ourselves in an odd spot for Starfield. The game comes out in just 27 days, at least for early access. Marketing has been surprisingly quiet. We had the Starfield Direct, which was massive, then a couple of smaller videos, but otherwise it's relatively been quiet. At this point, it seems unlikely that hands-on previews from media are happening. Fallout 76 had this big event where media got 3 hours of unrestricted access to that game, but as of right now, it seems like something similar will not be happening for Starfield, or at the very least, it'll be much smaller scale. I wouldn't be shocked if one major outlet gets a preview a couple of weeks before release, like IGN or Game Informer, but honestly, Starfield not having huge media hands-on impressions isn't that crazy either. Although it was big for Fallout 76, it wasn't a thing at all for Fallout 4. As it stands right now, there are two major points that we may see updates for Starfield. QuakeCon is just around the corner, but then also, of course, we are definitely getting new details at Gamescom, so you can look forward to that. There definitely have been fan frustrations over the lack of marketing, but I do kind of ask, what else do you need to see? The Direct was massive. We got 50 minutes of new Starfield content in just a singular day. Something like that likely took months upon months of work to accomplish, so it's not that crazy to me that they've been relatively quiet in the aftermath of that. If we get any more gameplay trailers or even demos, they're likely going to pale in comparison to the Starfield Direct anyway, so I think largely what we're going to be waiting on now are reviews and for people outside of Bethesda to get their hands on or really see the game for themselves. But even that's a bit of an unknown. Bethesda hasn't always had the best review policies, and I wouldn't be shocked if people only get access to Starfield about 72 hours before the early access. Nothing has been confirmed thus far on that front, at least not to me, but it'll definitely be interesting to see how things are handled with Starfield reviews, especially with how massive of a game this is shaping up to be. That's the recent updates on Starfield. Again, get subscribed so you can check out some of my Gamescom coverage, but also check out this rumor on a potential Bethesda Game Studios remake that is coming very soon.